Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we're the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. A big thank you. We've got a new Patreon this week. Celon, I think, spelt like the T, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, so I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for joining Patreon. It really helps us make this podcast. Obviously, we publish our episodes about a week early. You get the Patreon exclusive Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, access to the Discord server, and yeah, a nice little community building there. But Celon, thank you for joining.
Always warms the heart when that comes through.
It does, it really does.
Speaking of warm, it is warm today. I think I've overdressed, but that's all right, because somewhere else, this is a terrible segue. When we talk about UFO cases, probably everyone automatically, if you're not in the law, you go straight to Roswell, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
Well, there's another big one, which is the Varginha case from Brazil, which I'm going to touch on, but not necessarily just because of the alien contact, but because there was a death, and that death is pretty mysterious.
Right, okay.
And so I've been looking into this potential that an alien bacterium caused the death of a police officer.
Wow, okay. I thought we were going for an alien murder. That would be
no.
That would be a hell of a true crime podcast, wouldn't it?
It would. Well, that's the other interesting thing about this case, is that the aliens in this case seem much more timid. Our normal, I guess, representation of aliens are those people that, all those beings that maybe come and whisk you away in the night. They're very much in control.
Yeah.
And they are not worried about earthlings, as it were. We are a subspecies to them.
Yeah.
Seems very different in this case.
Okay.
This happened in January 1996, and I must say, I hadn't heard of this until we started doing this podcast, then I became sort of aware of it by reading around. But back in 1996, I'd never heard of it. This involves creature sightings, it involves the military, and it absolutely involves a crashed craft. The first sighting, and really the one that was reported to the media and the one that the whole case initially hinges around, are the three young women that first see a creature. This is Liliane, Valerique, and Katia. And they are walking past, well, it's a vacant parking lot, or a vacant lot at least, in a place called Jardim Mandeira, which is in Varginha. And one of the girls sort of gets drawn to the graffiti. There's a graffiti artist who's been working on the wall there. And she goes a little bit closer to it. And then she sees this creature. She describes it as being about 5 feet tall, brown oily skin, large oval head, large red eyes, thin body and V-shaped feet, and we'll come back to the feet in a minute.
Wow. But
she said it appeared to be injured or sick, and it was emitting this strong ammonia-like odour. But it's crouched down in the grass, sort of trying to make itself unseen.
Right, trying to hide.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the one doing the graffiti.
It wasn't the one doing the graffiti, no. It's very much closer to what E.T. is in the film than a grey.
Yeah.
The girls run off and tell one of the mothers. She actually believes them and wants to come back. Now, the girls initially are really too scared to come back. They're terrified of this. But they do come back with her. And the mother, although she doesn't see the being, she sees this 3-toed print there's like loose red soil. Okay. And so it's almost like a bird print. I'm holding up my 3 middle fingers, and then there's like a pad of where its foot is, I suppose.
Yeah.
And she sees that really clearly, and obviously, I mean, she didn't disbelieve her daughter anyway, but now she's really on board with this.
So this is like the ball of a foot, and then almost the 3
the
talons of a bird, or
that's right, okay. With one very long central one.
Wow.
But that V shape is because you've got the 3, so there's sort of 2 going out either side in the shape of a V, and then 1 at the middle, presumably for stability.
Yeah.
But they're quite large. You know, I've seen a picture she's drawn, and it's bigger than a human foot. Not massively. I mean, we're not talking
Right.
super size, but it's more substantial than, I've got size 9s. It's bigger than my feet.
And certainly that I'm not don't know. I'm not an expert on South American birds, but I can't imagine there's many in that kind of location that could make that kind of print.
No. It's definitely not. It doesn't look like a bird at all because, as you say, the heel amount part of it. Birds don't tend to have that. These accounts, I think one of the curious things about this is that they never change. These 3 women, as they are now, they give the same account again and again and again. I found a report from 2024 when Liliane was interviewed again, and she just reiterated everything she'd said, and this time also pointed out these vein-like skin marks and head protuberances.
There's a couple of things I wanted to. So this is the start of it. So they didn't see strange lights in the sky. They didn't see a craft. They've literally come across an alien in a car park, really.
That's right.
There's something about it being in a urban setting and, like a car park or a back garden that, I don't know, it feels so weird compared to your almost stereotypical, it's in the middle of a forest or,
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's odd, isn't it?
It makes it all the more high strangeness.
Yeah.
But there is a craft associated with this. There is a crash. One of the most prominent witnesses, or I should say the pair of them, there's a farmer couple, Aurelina and Eurico, and they notice this cigar-shaped craft hovering around their farm because it's making their cattle go crazy.
Right.
And they describe it as being the size of a school minibus. So I guess Brazil is a little bit like the States. There are sort of those specific shaped school minibuses. So bigger than a car, smaller than a lorry.
Right.
They see that. But when you read their accounts, this craft is in trouble. There's, like he describes it as, there's a bit off the back that's missing. It's not a uniform shape. And other witnesses describe it as having smoke coming off it. Then there's a further witness that I was reading. He actually saw the crash scene. And this is where things get really weird, because the Brazilian military turn up. Now, other people say it's also the USAF turn up.
Right.
But certainly the Brazilian military are involved in blocking off the streets and shooing people away. So several witnesses claim that they were shooed away with a gun, literally being pushed by a gun barrel. Yes. And not in a nice, coercive way, but in a very aggressive way.
And timing-wise, this is around the same time as the other witnesses had seen this creature in the car park? Or?
Yes. So obviously the craft is seen earlier than the girls witness it, but it's the night before. But obviously the craft comes first.
Right.
So we end up with this situation where there is a crash site which is covered in debris, and it's outside of Virginia itself. It's sort of on the outskirts, and there's one house which is very close to it that is sort of, I guess, that's the reason why people see it, because there is a track to this farm. That's why people see the crash itself.
Right.
The people are shooed away from there, and then there's a military blockade in one of the main streets in Virginia, which stops people going down that road to observe the crash scene. The girls see the alien being about a block away, not an American-style block, but a Brazilian-style block, so a few tens of feet away. They see this craft. They see this being. But beyond the women who have seen this, there's a military witness, Saulo Machado. He claimed to be involved in capturing one of the creatures. He says that he got within 5 feet of it for about 10 seconds. And his account is, he has the two main things that he says are these big red eyes. They're described as being about 4 times the size of a human eye, which is really massively disconcerting. Wow. And this iron-coloured, oily skin, and again, this acetone-like smell.
So similar, pretty much identical description to the other one. I have got a question about the original thing. Maybe it's because of their age. If they live in that area and the day before there's all this commotion, they don't seem to be aware of it.
No, that's true.
I'm not saying that.
No,
it's
you're right.
a little kind of yellow flag for me, that of just like, well, surely if there's this big commotion, there would be some knowledge that there was something there. Maybe not.
Well, so a filmmaker, so we're sort of forward winding a little bit, but there's a filmmaker who decided to investigate this case last year, and one of the techniques he did was stand in the middle of Regina with a sign saying, if you know about this case, come and talk to me.
Great idea.
And he got a lot of people, and the accounts are very consistent, but there's a lot of people who see a light.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not like there's a multitude of people who see the crash site or see the beings, but they describe the agitation of animals. They describe seeing things in the sky that are unusual,
and then all this military activity, I guess. Yeah.
All this military activity, but there's other reports of the creatures. So one of my favourite ones is there's a zoo night watchman. So late on January 20th, about 10:30. This zoo watchman, which is about 2k away from where the girls see the being, he describes this brown, short being running through his zoo. Now, he thinks it's an escaped animal. Of course he does. Yeah. But on inspection, there is nothing open. There's nothing missing. Wow. And he just puts it down to, weird imagination.
It's almost like a scene in a movie, that, isn't it? You could see the movie bit of the zoo and the animals going crazy, and wow, okay, that's interesting.
There's a guy who has been investigating this case for a long time, Hildo Fontana, and he's been tracking the sightings of the beings, and he thinks that they were dispersing beyond the city. So, well, it's not the town. When they crashed, his belief is that the beings went towards the habitation, then realised that perhaps they might be in trouble. I guess they were as scared of the humans as the humans were of them, and he thinks that they were trying to disperse into the countryside, which is why you get these sightings that are beyond the town itself.
Which as a strategy does make sense, because I was thinking, your description of the size of this cigar-shaped craft, smaller than a lorry, bigger than a car.
Yeah.
Of course, it could be, who knows, transdimensional beings or how they travel. But if they've come across the galaxy, you think there needs to be a mothership somewhere, and this is go and explore down on Earth, rather than they've travelled all the way in that one cramped. For I don't know how many beings have been seen, but we're up to 2, 3 at least have been spotted separate, I guess, unless they're seeing the same one.
Yeah.
But still, even if it's one being in a cigar-shaped UFO that is smaller than a truck, that's a long way to go in a small thing if there isn't a mothership. So my point is, if you crash, you go, try and hide. Find somewhere to hide and we'll come and pick you up.
Yes, there's a denouement to that story as well. But I wanted to just spend just a beat talking about this distinct smell.
Yeah.
Because this isn't something...
All right.
It is, the dog has just come in. It's not something that comes up in the majority of abduction cases, really.
Yes. We've talked about weird smells in ghost stories, but not really in terms of UFOs.
And in Bigfoot and Yeti sightings, the people describe that stench. And with those, you quite often get descriptions like rotting meat and human bodily odour.
Yeah, and sulphur with ghosts and stuff. Yeah.
With this one, this ammonia, when I mentioned the mother earlier who goes back to see where her daughter had seen the being, she goes on to describe that she gets this ammonia scent up her nose, and she goes so far as to wash her nasal cavity with alcohol to try and get this stench out, because it takes a long time for it to go.
We've all used that excuse.
Yes, officer. So it has led to a speculation that maybe they have an ammonia-based metabolism.
Or they're travelling for thousands of light years and just needed a wee.
Well, so that is the other
There is really? Okay.
Yes, because they don't appear to have any genitals. Perhaps they excrete waste through their skin.
Okay. Yeah, makes
so
sense. Yeah.
as humans, one of the reasons that sweat is smelly, apart from the bacteria that live on the goodness that comes out of the protein and whatever, we also do excrete urea through the skin. So when you're in the desert, you don't urinate so much,
Because you're
and you do
sweating
get
more.
rid of some of those byproducts through there. But there is this thought that these beings, they may not need to use the lavatory. They may just emit their waste products through their skin the entire time.
Well, this is another reason if you've travelled thousands of light years in a small craft, you're going to want to get out, aren't you? Because it must be honking by the time you get to Earth.
Well, they might be used to it.
They might like it.
It might be like Chanel number 5
that's
for
true.
wherever they're coming from.
Yeah.
But you also can't rule out there's things like injury or decomposition. So if they are injured, maybe that is, when they're bleeding, maybe that's them bleeding out. We don't know this, or it could be a protective mechanism. But it comes up a lot all the way through this case. So it's sort of worth just keeping in mind that it might mean they're injured.
Sorry, I got another thought on that. If they are smelly, let's say, the zoo would be a good place to hide because that's a pretty honking environment. So, you can kind of hide a bit there.
Imagine coming from another galaxy and being told before you get there, briefed on possibly, the most significant life forms there, they're bipedal, like you are. They call themselves humans, got it. They land at the zoo. What's that thing? Walking past the kangaroos.
Well, also caged up because you'd be fearful, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well,
this is what they do to other species.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Yes, possibly. I hadn't thought of that. That's a very good thought. Of course, when we go through and find out that the military were involved, then you do start to worry about how much of a cover-up there is.
Yeah.
But this is where I think things get interesting.
Hold on a second. Has this been the boring bit?
Well, this is where things get a little bit juicy because everything that we've spoken about so far has been roundly denied. Of course it has, by the military, by the police, by everybody, apart from, most notably, the local mayor, again, who was interviewed by this filmmaker last year, said he believes in the whole thing because he said, I don't know why a whole town would lie. When those beings were eventually rounded up, and it does seem like at least 2 were,
Right.
they were taken to hospital. They weren't. Nobody was evil to them. There was a hope that they would be saved.
Right.
One of the people that took them to hospital is a guy called Marco Eli Chereze, who's a military officer. He captured one of these beings with his bare hands, it seems. Wow. He could sort of wrestled it, wrapped it up, and took it to the hospital in his police car. He himself was admitted to the regional hospital in Virginia on February the 12th, 1996, taken to the emergency ward, and interestingly, he was presenting with intense lumbar pain, so it was assumed that he had a herniated disc, like literally nothing to do with anything that might be construed as being weird.
Now, have you lifted any heavy aliens recently?
Well, yes, I hadn't thought about that. Yes. In fact, there isn't an account of how much they weighed. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But he gets a blood analysis, and it's revealed that he's got a very high white blood count, and he has a very immature blood count. And there's something called, he has an 8% toxic granulations in neutrophils, and that signals a serious infection. So I didn't know what the toxic granulation meant. It basically, my understanding of it is, this is how you determine whether you've got a serious infection.
Right.
And it is immediately suspected that he's developing septicemia. So he's treated with penicillin and gentamicin, all of the normal things that you would expect. Now, although septicemia is very serious, if it's captured early, it can normally be contained. He was transferred to the ICU at this same hospital on February the 15th, just 3 days later. at 11 a.m. This is 26 days after the encounter, and that's when he died. He died at 11:15.
Can I just go back over the timeline then? So he says he put this creature in his police car, takes it to a hospital or somewhere.
Yeah, it's the local hospital in Regina, yeah.
And then he goes to the hospital or doctor not feeling well. How long do we know how long after the alien encounter?
Yeah.
Was?
So the ET encounter is January 20th. He's admitted to the hospital on February 12th.
Okay, and then dies
February 15th.
Wow. Okay.
So
it's pretty close. I mean, the only thing I was thinking, and again, there's lots of other evidence going around, but if you are fighting off an infection and close to septicemia, I can't say it. I'm not a medical expert, but you can hallucinate, can't you? You can be in a hallucinatory state at that point. So I'm not saying that's what happened.
Yeah, you can.
But you could. But I guess there's so much other witness accounts and statements that kind of works. If it was just that story, you could say, well, he had an infection and he was, his brain was all over the place. But there's lots of other evidence around. Yeah.
But there's another strange thing about the infection.
Okay.
What is discovered that is causing the infection is, oh gosh, I hate these words. I have practiced this. A Staphylococcus schleiferi bacterium, sorry. Now that sounds like, okay, what's that then?
Sounds like a mouthful.
It is. It does cause infections, but it is primarily a veterinarian disease. It is for dogs and cats. It's rarely seen in humans.
Right.
And if it is seen in humans, it is very quickly cleared up. It isn't serious in humans.
Right.
It's not even that serious in dogs and cats. But after this report so that is done using blood analysis and urine analysis. As soon as he's dead, there is an autopsy, but the full autopsy report is very circumstantial. It doesn't really go into huge amounts of detail. And the doctor who was treating him and then performed the autopsy unusually said, we want to get this body in the ground as quickly as possible. That is a direct quote. Wow. Now, various people say, oh, well, he was worried about infections passing on. But if he'd known what this was, which is this particular bacterium, he wouldn't have been worried about it. No, absolutely. There's no reason for that at all. He provides an interview to the Brazilian UFO magazine in August 2004, and he describes Chereze's rapid decline, noting that the 3 bacteria attacked him in less than 20 days are a rare occurrence. The doctor is called Furtado, not that one. He said he found the death strange and without rational explanation, suggesting an acquired immunodeficiency, as Chereze's immune deficiency did seem compromised. The official accounts make a big deal of the fact that Chereze had an abscess under his left armpit, which apparently had been left untreated because he didn't realise that it might be serious. But it was reportedly cured before he was admitted for this hospital, for this event in February. But a lot of people have been trying to draw the conclusion that it was this abscess that caused the blood infection
and the hallucination
and the death. Yeah.
In terms of maybe we don't know this, but he claims he came across this alien being, puts it in the back of his patrol car or whatever he's got, and takes it to a hospital, or did he take it to the military?
No, he takes it to this hospital.
So there is some record of that event?
Yeah.
You're going to get to
that. I might as well get onto it now, because the only other thing that I was going to pull up is that his the family of the deceased, particularly his sister Antonia, she to this day says that she believes that there is a connection to the ET capture.
Yeah.
And she has been sort of fighting for some justice for this.
There is a certain logic to that, because I'm thinking of, at the days of the British Empire and going to, like when we went to Australia or America, it was often, and the missionaries, it was often the diseases that were taken there that would kill the local population, right?
War of the Worlds.
Yeah, that's kind of almost the other way round, isn't it, in this scenario? I was thinking that as well. So there is a certain logic. And again, if you're that doctor who's done the autopsy or the military, you would kind of go, there is a danger here that this thing could wipe out all of us. We've got to get it sorted.
There is, but that then implies that the doctor believes that this is from that extraterrestrial. So I'm going to list a few more cases in a minute where people have been bodily injured by apparent contact with alien beings. Right. But to answer your point, so yes, it appears that the beings were taken to this hospital. Then things get a bit misty because, of course, it's buried in secrecy. But it appears that they're still alive at this point. People were trying to save them, but then they were picked up by the military. And there is an account, again, by this filmmaker who's been looking into it. He gets an interview with somebody who claims to be a whistleblower who was part of the convoy taking these beings to a base. And he describes how this was a well-equipped convoy that wasn't stopping for anybody. As you can imagine, he goes through like how many vehicles were involved or whatever. Then when they get to, he doesn't know what this is about. When they get to this military medical facility, again, he doesn't know what he's about to see. He walks in and he describes several doctors standing around with clipboards. There's a military photographer with a video camera, but it's hanging off his arm. He says there's this air of mistrust in the room and not knowing what is going on. He then spies in this box the lower half of what he later learns is an extraterrestrial, but he thinks it's perhaps an incredibly injured human being because it's covered in this oily substance, but there are 2 legs and 2 feet. So he thinks, perhaps, 5 foot isn't necessarily a child.
Yeah.
And then he sees the 3 toes and realizes something's going on. And it's at that point when he is cordially invited to leave the room. And then he gets a big conversation where he's told, nobody talks about this ever. Right. And if you do talk about it, you and your family will not be alive.
There's lots of parallels with Roswell here, aren't there?
So many parallels.
Yeah, I was thinking the guy in the funeral home in Roswell who was an undertaker, wasn't he? He was sent to the military base with child-sized coffins. Do you remember this?
Yes.
It's reminding me a bit of that. Because I started thinking, hold on, so if this police officer who tragically died of his infection had taken it to just a general hospital, you would think that would be a hell of a commotion, wouldn't you? You arrive with this thing, unless he's been told to do it quietly, but then again, why wouldn't you just take it to the base? So that's the bit of the story I'm thinking, can you imagine you turn up with an alien in the back of your car? You're a police officer, so it's not like you're going to go, this is a prank, and you bring this thing into the hospital. It would be bedlam, wouldn't it?
Well, he's a military officer, actually. And I think the thing about this is that nobody knows what to do with it because it's such an unusual case, and even he isn't clear
what it is,
that it isn't necessarily a human.
Right.
So there's another aspect to the explanation of the beings. So the official explanation of the beings, and that came up again in the 2024 interview with a couple of the ladies, is that the police eventually said that they put the sightings down to a local homeless man who is named, but that's besides the point, because they said, he would go around and steal food. He would often be, not bathed. But it's completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous.
He got around a bit, didn't he?
Yes, he's running up by the zoo.
2 kilometres to the zoo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Chereze would know whether he was picking up a human person or an alien, and that contradicts what I said before. But at the same time, if he's picking this thing up, where do you go? There's like you don't necessarily know that you can take it to the military base. You know there's a hospital there. This thing looks like it's in trouble.
But again, if that theory was true, then that would say the moving it from the general hospital to the military. Why would you do that if it's just a homeless person?
Oh, of course, yes, absolutely.
There's
No.
sense in that.
The homeless person's story makes no sense
It's
at
just
all.
a cover.
No.
It would be better, wouldn't you, going it was an escaped animal from the zoo, wouldn't you? At least that gives you a little more, you know what I mean?
We've had that story before with alien sightings.
Yeah.
And of course, where do we hear the escapes from the zoo? On the alien big cats. All the time we hear about that from alien big cats.
Yeah.
But quite often we hear it's the craft that hurt people. So I knew this, but I had to refresh my memory a bit. Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, 1980, Texas, USA. They encounter this diamond-shaped UFO, which is emitting intense heat. Betty Cash, who got out of her vehicle to look at it, was the closest to the object. She develops severe symptoms, including nausea, vomiting, burns, and blisters.
Yeah.
She's hospitalized for weeks and later diagnosed with radiation-like injuries. And although no official cause was confirmed, she died in 1998 from cancer and heart issues. Now, you can't link that directly to something that happened 18 years earlier, but the people who lived on longer, that's Vicky and Colby, they also had health issues, and they believe very strongly that cancer and heart disease came from her encounter with this craft. Now, that sort of logically makes a lot more sense.
And there's been quite a lot of those stories, haven't there, of kind of radiation. I don't think I've come across one that's been more biological.
No, well, I was going to say that there's the Falcon Lake incident. In that case, the witness, he touches the craft, which burns his gloves and chest, and he gets a grid-like mark on his chest. He gets nausea, vomiting, and a drop in lymphocyte count, which resembles radiation sickness.
Yeah.
But he dies years later, and there really isn't any connection with that necessarily with that craft. But there are some people who have been perhaps infected with something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and one of the cases of that, strangely, goes back to the Fatima incident, the miracle of the sun.
Oh, really?
Yes. So if nobody knows the story, very quickly, this happens, as I say, 1917. Very specifically, 3 children witness the apparition of the Virgin Mary. 70,000 people go on to watch this sun dance, spin, emit strange coloured lights. That's why it's called the miracle of the sun. But some people who were there reported burns, temporary blindness, and fatigue. And local priest reports a few deaths shortly afterwards from a sudden illness. So initially it was put down to divine wrath or exhaustion, but there's 2 cases. There's a Francisco and a Jacinta. They die from what the doctors reported at the time was an unknown influenza. So there are at least 2 recorded cases there of a sort of a bacterial or viral infection.
Wow.
But I will caveat that with, I did just say 70,000 people. So, you know, can you really put it down to that? Yeah. But this priest did think they were connected because he's talking about this divine wrath. And, of course, it's an episode we did before, the Black Death, 1347 to 1351, which is when the core outbreak is. The plague-stricken towns, there's these sightings of these hooded figures spraying a mist into the air. We covered this quite extensively.
Yeah, mistaken for the Grim Reaper. Again, the connection is it's a long shot connection, but there are contemporary reports
of weird smells at the time, because I likened it to sort of that's how we got onto the mad gasser stuff.
Yeah.
But the smell of ammonia and stuff, although people didn't know what the smell of ammonia was, they said that it smelled more of the devil, which is something that you would associate with like a brimstone-y smell. Brimstone, ammonia, it's a long shot, they smell the same, but perhaps, they're both sort of caustic up the nose.
Having said earlier that I've not come across smells in touch with UFOs, when we did that episode on paranormal smells, I think I mainly focused on smells of sulfur and things associated with ghosts and other phenomena. But I think there was a whole bit in that book, which I don't think I featured, which was connecting it to UFO activity. So I may have been a little inaccurate when I said I'd not heard of it earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just to finish this particular line of thought, I found I found one reference to this in a fairly obscure book that I had to download the PDF for. But in 1918, related to this Fatima incident, there is a child witness to the miracle of the sun who claims to have seen a hooded shape appearing before her siblings before they fell ill and died. And I've got no more information than that.
Right.
But there is a connection, it seems, to being a hooded shape, the Fatima incident, and UFOs. You might say that's me reaching, but I was just trying to find some more evidence that might be there.
Makes sense.
But then something else that we covered, and I wanted to go and look at, just see where it had got to now. Do you remember me talking about Stratostar? So that's the company that was putting balloons into the upper atmosphere looking for bacteria.
Yes.
So they claimed in June 2012, and that's a long time ago now, I know, but they claimed they'd found 4 strains of bacteria in Earth's upper atmosphere that they described as alien bacteria with no resemblance to anything on this planet.
And there was also connected with that with the Red Rain episode that we
That's
did.
right. Yeah. Unfortunately, the trail on that has gone cold because we'd be looking for DNA sequencing, microbiological taxonomy, anything like that. We haven't got that. But it's the point there is Stratostar are credible.
Yeah.
So has there been a cover-up? Probably unlikely. It's probably just a mistake, but it is interesting. But I think the thing about the Regina case that is so compelling is that the family still believe that there was a cover-up on his death, and the death, when you go through what the doctor is saying, he's not suggesting that he caught those diseases off the ET. What he's saying is that his immune system is compromised by his connection with the extraterrestrial being. And that is quite similar to those cases that I read out where people are getting symptoms of radiation sickness, because one of the things that happens with radiation sickness is your immune system gets compromised.
So in that scenario, he's had contact with this alien. He's fighting off, his body is fighting off something, his immune system goes down, so then other stuff.
That's right.
It's a byproduct of that has resulted in the infection and the death, potentially.
That's right, that's right. Now, there is another potential explanation for this, which is, it doesn't really hold up, but I read a chapter in a different source material. So at the time of this case happening in 1996, AIDS is well under control, but it still has a huge stigma.
Yeah.
And I am not suggesting this. This is the work of another author suggesting that perhaps this individual had contracted something like AIDS, and there was a shame on it, it doesn't have to be, that isn't, we're not saying that it is shameful, but perhaps there was an embarrassment and they wanted to cover it up. That to me seems wholly unlikely, and even more unlikely than a contact with an ET. Because if that was the case, the rest of your family who knew that to be the case would not keep pushing for an answer to it. The other weird thing about this is that the people that were working with him around that time, there's a man who, I mean, this is only like 29 years ago, so there's many people are still alive. The filmmaker who is researching this case goes to the house of his sort of partner who he was patrolling with. And he threatens them with a gun and says, I'm not going to answer any ET questions. You have to get off my land. Right. So there is still a great sensitivity. Now, that could just be that he's sick to death of hearing this story.
Turning up,
Yeah, but at the same time, you don't threaten to kill somebody for asking you questions about this.
One question I had, this description of the alien creature and the foot thing is very interesting.
Yeah.
There are lots of descriptions of alien greys, come across lizard people. Any that fit the bill of this creature in other places or stories?
That's interesting. Not that I'm aware of, although I didn't cross-check that for this. I was sort of focused on this case. But most of the time we hear about like the Greys and the Nordics.
Yeah.
There are, I mean, off the top of my head, the story, Travis Walton's story, the beings in that aren't massively dissimilar to this, but he doesn't describe the ammonia smell or the three toes. I think the three toes makes it, I mean, I'm not going to say unique, but that is an unusual feature. But when you go and look at the accounts, actually, there aren't many descriptions of the feet of a
It's not the first place you'd look, really.
It's not the first place you look, no.
And also on board the mothership, they wear slippers most of the time. It's more comfy.
Is that right? I didn't realise that. Yeah. That is weird. But there's another part of this case which I think, this for me is particularly unusual. So in terms of the spacecraft itself, which has been crashed in this field, and the witness sort of says it's a debris field, but there is a bit of the hull intact. So there's kind of like I guess sort of almost cylindrical part of it, like you would see in an aircraft crash, I suppose. And this is all cleared up by a mixture of the US Air Force and apparently local Brazilian troops. And then that is taken away. But then what people see, people are still observing lights in the sky. But what they're observing, they describe as a craft that is doing a grid pattern, and they say it's searching for something.
Right. Mothership retrieval.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the reason that is given for, well, by that UFO researcher who says that he thinks that the beings were trying to flee is because they wanted to be spotted by this thing that is looking for them.
Yeah.
And there is a certain sadness to, if their people had come back for them, if they hadn't been taken to a hospital, perhaps they might have survived if they'd been picked up. And there's probably an element of guilt. I mean, very clear, nobody wanted these beings to die. All the witnesses, they were just scared of them. The girls, there was an interesting question put to them in an interview that I read from the mid-2000s, where they were, because we hear a lot about this telepathic communication, and they were asked, like, did you feel any communication from the being? And they said all they felt was fear and a sense that it wanted to be helped. Now, they didn't say that it was necessarily like a being telepathically transmitted to them, but they said it was very clear that this thing was scared and it was looking for assistance, but it didn't know how to ask for it. So they felt although they were terrified of it, they didn't feel it was going to attack them. They said it was the same thing as you would see a wild animal that was injured. Yeah. You probably wouldn't go up and touch it, but you know that it just wants help.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking back to the police officer who sadly died. He's come across this creature. He could have a completely different reaction, couldn't he, and run away. But he felt secure enough to actually pick it up, put it in the back of his car, take it to a hospital. It doesn't sound like a man who's in intense fear of it.
No.
If it's true, yeah.
No. I mean, and don't forget, he's military, so he's kind of like, you know...
He's trained, but still, you know.
Yeah, and he probably used to being... He's trained in dealing with unusual situations, one would imagine. But I do think that because the town still remembers this, and this case is still alive. Not just the crash, but also the death. It's one of those sort of, it's a living Roswell. It's something that we can actually visit now. One of the things that hasn't happened has been an excavation of the crash site.
Right.
So that has happened in Roswell a number of times. And more recently, I've read that to throw people off the Roswell case, when the military were clearing up there, they planted fake pieces of evidence in there, pieces of wires, rocks sprayed silver, just to throw off the case.
And a lot of people say that's what Area 51 is as well. It's almost a distraction rather than a place. It's almost becomes a focal point for everyone to obsess and visit, where that's not where the action is.
Well, that's what Bob Lazar said as well, didn't he? He said that he was at S12, and that's where they had the UFOs. What this also points to, as well as the potential dangers, and we don't know whether that is, again, we don't know whether it's from the being itself or from their craft, whatever it was that perhaps injured him, is just that enormous number of different species that are being reported. And I know there's many people, including Avi Loeb, have spoken about how many different beings there are. There's an audio interview that Howard Hughes did with the former Canadian Defence Secretary who died last year, who was warning on the dangers of aliens, and he came up with a figure of over 100 different species that we're aware of.
Right.
So this might be a species that is, it might be that they're not just scared of humans. I think there's a very credible possibility that they're scared of another alien race, and that craft that was looking for them, maybe that was a different being who was sort of, they don't appreciate their interference with their science experiment.
Or as we've said before, the film department of the TV station, the alien TV station, has gone, look, the Greys channel, they're doing really well with their documentaries about Earth. We need to get in on this. We'll commission a trip. It's also reminded me a bit of one of my favourite songs by the Pixies, Motorway to Roswell. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
I have not.
It's very good. It's the basic concept of it is aliens visiting, going on holiday around the galaxy, and then they accidentally crash at Roswell. And it's about how crappy their holiday's been, because they end up in. He talks about we ended up in army crates, and it's really worth a listen. It's really, really funny. But it's reminded me of that. Yeah, that concept is they were just on holiday and they accidentally crashed and it all turned into a nightmare. Holiday from hell for an alien.
Oh, that's sad if that's what happened to these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was looking at the idea of the alien film crew, I was thinking this very much looks like Naked and Afraid, that sort of thing. But maybe it was just one of those cases of actual contact, and we squandered it because we're idiots or because we didn't know what we were doing and we weren't expecting it. If those beings had lived, who knows what would have happened. I mean, we probably still wouldn't have known anymore.
They may have done.
Well, yes, it's possible they may have done, yeah. But all those people walking around, including that whistleblower, the sister, all those people that know something happened, and look what we do. We like their case is basically relegated to some YouTube channels and some podcasts like ours to talk about them. They don't really have a platform, and I think that is really damaging the whole UFO thing. And so many people, I found one quote from like a credible reporter from, it was one of the mainstream newspapers, who just said, oh, this is a whole load of nothing. But it can't be a whole load of nothing. If it was a whole load of nothing, people wouldn't still be talking about it. You couldn't stand with a sign in the middle of the street asking for people to tell you about it, and they do. You couldn't find someone's sister from a man who died 29 years ago who is still upset and believes that the death was caused by an ET. It doesn't ring true that it's a whole load of nothing.
I was thinking, let's say you come at it from a totally sceptical point of view. The thing I think is interesting is something happened there to create this legend, let's call it that, or the lore around it. It didn't just come out of thin air. So, if you're going to debunk it, there's quite a lot to debunk. Witnesses, the military being there, something happened at that place. You've then got these reports of creatures. You've got a police officer dying mysteriously. Now, you could probably, I don't know, you could probably debunk bits of those. Oh, mass hysteria, or it's a military crash, or it was just a coincidence with the police officer. But it starts to mount up, doesn't it, as something that it's not just one explanation. You've got to kind of have a number of debunking explanations together, a bit like those ghost story debunking, going, oh, well, it was, oh, that was a trick of the light. That bit was a train making a noise, and that bit was that. And you're going, wow, there's a lot to come together here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. It's the dismissal all the time of this that is frustrating everybody, I think, right now. Like, just I've got it on my side notes, and it wasn't the main thing to talk about. It was kind of backup evidence, but I was reading into this. Happened much more recently, 2004 in Sicily. It's called the Coronia incident, and this is in a rural area, and there's a particular farmer, Antonio Spinato, who saw a glowing orb, and he also had spontaneous fires in his appliances around the house. Yeah. He was taken to hospital experiencing fatigue, skin lesions, and fever. There were immune deficiency-like symptoms presenting as well, but he was dismissed as having stress, and the stress was, it doesn't quite make sense, because the official explanation was stress from seeing these orbs and craft, but the stress also caused him to hallucinate the orbs and the craft. Right. So it's a loop of causality, which doesn't actually, doesn't make any sense. So where that sort of thing is really frustrating and doesn't get us anywhere. Yeah. It's a fascinating case. I didn't want to, it doesn't merit a whole episode because not enough happens, but it's very much like a Steven Spielberg Close Encounters thing, with orbs chasing cars down roads and cars not working, appliances exploding, and people getting ill. But yeah, that's a different case. But I found the Fatima one. I didn't realise that there was a connection back to potential illnesses and potentially to deaths.
Well, I think what's interesting, we touched on it earlier, of all the way through I was thinking this would make a great movie adaptation, but I guess you haven't really got an ending. That's the difficulty with it, you know what I mean? Everything, all the setup's perfect, but you'd have to make up some glorious ending, wouldn't you? But there's so much there.
Well, the ending is probably the ongoing people knocking on the doors of authority to find out what's going on. Yeah. I mean, the truth of it, if what we hear from other cases, so gosh, I talked about this 2 years ago now. There was a whistleblower who claimed to be part of a NATO recovery team for UFOs that operated in NATO countries. The military person in this case, who claims to be the whistleblower from the Brazilian military, who claims that the Americans sort of landed without permission, but nobody was going to challenge them, and they sort of dealt with the craft. This all rings to a sort of like, even the Brazilians probably don't know what happened because it's taken away so quickly. And that does sort of make sense. That NATO whistleblower said that the Chinese and the Russians have similar cases, because the prize here is the tech, isn't it? Like, if you boil it down to what really matters, alien contact is nice, but the better thing to have in the short term is the little gadget from their control wheelie that you can turn into a missile or a satellite, or you can sell to people to put in their pockets and the next iPhone. That's where the real, unfortunately, fiscal value comes from.
I thought you were going to come up with a brilliant bumper sticker then, but it was a bit long on the end. Oh, alien contact is nice, but it's the tech we're after.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's true, isn't it? It's true. Yeah. Contact with an alien race. Yeah. If you look at the way that US politics is now, what can you do for me? Oh, hello, my name is blah, blah, blah from the planet blah, blah, blah. Great, what have you got for us? Nothing, I just thought I'd come and say hello. Right. 20% tariff on landing here.
On Zorgon.
On Zorgon, yes.
I don't remember seeing that one on the map. You just spot it was down the bottom. That's why we didn't see it.
Do you have a valid visa? Yeah, whereas, we bring you these amazing pieces of tech.
The thing is, I did know a bit about this story, but you certainly brought out bits of it that I wasn't aware of. I wasn't aware of the footprints. I wasn't aware of this trip to hospital and the demise of the police officer. There's really,
It's a military.
Sorry, what did I say?
Police officer.
Oh, sorry, he's the one who died.
He's the one who dies military.
I've said it over and over again.
It's all right. I've always said he's military. It's
yeah,
right.
No, you've corrected me and I just keep ignoring you. Stubbornly ignoring you. No, he's not. He's
a police officer.
He's a police officer, and I'm going to say it one more time. Anyway, him, the military man. Yeah, I'd not heard that bit of the story. I think when I've heard that story before, it's really focused on these kind of crouching creatures.
And those three witness testimonies.
Yeah. So amazing.
And I think that...
What an amazing thing for a police officer to do. No, sorry, military.
That is why I think a lot of people don't realise the scale of it, because of the... where all the beings were sighted. There are several eyewitness accounts, but there's also another one, which frustratingly I can't get it, but there's a guy called Vittorio Paccaccini, who's a ufologist. He claims to have watched a 35-second video of the Vagina ET in 2012, so that's when he watched the video.
Right.
And he described the being as weak, non-communicative, with attempts to help it stand and feed it an apple with water, but it didn't respond. This video is not publicly available, but matches eyewitness descriptions. Yeah, so he wrote about this in a magazine called Diamondale da Ufologia, which I've probably mangled that. But this is a claim that he makes. Now, he doesn't go on to say who he thinks made the video. And obviously, we've only got one man's word for it, which is why I don't think you can add it into the evidence portfolio. But it is interesting that it goes along with that narrative of people were trying to help. Although I'm not sure that the best thing to do is to feed, what else would you do? But an apple and water could be poisonous. But if they've got a different sort of metabolism, which is sort of suggested by the stench and the oiliness on their skin, an apple and water might be the thing that kills it. But we don't know. But it sort of, I guess, if there's nothing else, it tells us that there's a general consensus that there wasn't animosity towards these beings.
I realised where I was getting my movie thought of the zoo. It's American Werewolf in London, isn't it? Do you remember where he wakes up and he's in the zoo? Can't remember. He's in the lion cage or something. Can't remember. But yes, okay, that makes sense.
And all the animals go crazy.
It makes sense. He would be with wolves, doesn't it? But yeah, okay. Yes. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, really good summary of it. Really some really interesting facts that I'd not heard before about that case. I think as well the public involvement makes it a little bit more interesting in a way than Roswell, because it's quite a closed group, isn't it, Roswell, when you think about it?
Yes, it is, and it was a much earlier time. So what we've got now is there's people alive when that happened. So 1996 was sort of 5 years away from being able to share things on mobile phones, and we're sort of 10 years away from social media. But those people now have picked up on that and are able to talk. But I think there is a inherent distrust of, it's Brazil. There's a prejudice against it. Yeah. I think if this was in Yorkshire, people might give it a bit more credibility, unfortunately, which is again something that is wrong about the investigations. But
we'd be giving the alien a tea rather than an apple.
Yeah.
Nice strong tea. That's what it needs.
Well, somewhere in the universe is a being that lives entirely on tea. So, keep that in mind. But
great.
Try not to touch an alien being if you see one.
Yeah.
It might be dangerous.
Yeah. You've been warned.
And
Don't say we're not a public service.
if you give an apple,
broadcaster.
no, exactly, public service broadcasting. If you've been affected by anything that you've heard here,
Yeah.
please go to our Patreon at /TQM pod and tell us what you think on our Discord server.
Yeah. Or ask a policeman.
Ask a policeman, yeah, but not one who's trying to carry an alien.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, next week, I think I said after my last step, I was going to try and do something that didn't mess with my brain as much as my
you
my
promised us
flirtation with consciousness and premonition. So I think I've found something, but I'm not going to mention it in case I change my mind. But yes, I've got some good old ghost stories coming up.
Oh, very good. And as my dog slowly snores in the background, we can say goodbye.
See you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?